Daf Ayin Vav Amud Beis, the Mishnah right at the top. If a person carries, he takes out on Shabbos food that is the size of a groigers, a dried fig, he's chayiv. The shear for oichlim is a groigers. Umitzdarfim imzeh, and different types of foodstuffs, they combine with each other. If he has a little bit of this food and a little bit of the other food, they all combine together mipnei sheshavim b'shiureim, because they all have the same shear. All of the food, the shear for food, all of it is a groigers. So therefore, they can combine with each other. As opposed to the previous case where it was animal fodder. Over there, there's different shiurim for Tevin and Eitzah and Omer. They have different shiurim. There, the previous Mishnah said they're not mitzvah. But over here, by the food, all of the food that's for human consumption, the shear is all the same as kegroigres. So the different types of food are mitzvah. So they can all be mitzvah, except chutz mikli posam, except for the shells. You cannot combine the shells. Do not combine to make up the shear. V'garinein, the pits, v'uksem, the stems, v'subin, and coarse bran, umursin, and the fine bran. These things do not combine to make up the shear. These things do not make up the shear because these are not edible. People don't normally eat these things. They're not eaten normally. They don't have the chashivas, so therefore they don't combine. What is the difference between subin and mursin? Between the coarse bran and the fine bran is when they do, in the coarse bran is in the course of the winnowing, it separates the coarse bran from the seed. Then, and the later stage, when they do the sifting, that they sift out the flour, there is some particles of bran over there, and that sifts out the finer particles of bran. Both of these do not combine to make up the shlit of the person because they are either not edible or not eaten by the average person, as we'll see in the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda he says that is correct. He agrees with all of that, except he says there's an exception to this rule, which are the shells of the lentils. That is mitzvah because those are eaten. People eat with the lentils, they eat the shells with them. They're softer, they're eaten with them, so therefore they are considered part of the food, and they do combine to the shir of groigers to mechayiv the person. So he says, they're cooked with the lentils, and then they're eaten with them, so therefore they're considered part and parcel of the food, and they are mitzdarf. And you mean to tell me that the bran, the coarse and the fine bran are not mitzdarf? We learned in the Mishnah in Chala that says the following. 5 quarters of kemach. 5 chameshes revoim kemach. So 1 1/4 of the kemach of the kav. If you have 5 quarters of kav, 1 1/4 kavim of flour, chayim b'chala. That quantity of dough is made from that quantity of flour. One has to be mafresh challah. He has to remove the challah. It has to be given to the kohen. There is a chiyuv of challah on it. Less than that, there's no chiyuv challah. But that quantity or more, there is a chiyuv to be mafresh challah. Now, what makes up that quantity is hein v'subin umursanin. It made up, combined with that, are the coarse bran and the fine bran. They all come out. They can all combine to that shear. And therefore you see, however, that that's considered that this is what's made out of bread. The challah is what you're mafresh. It's a certain quantity of dough that's made into bread that you're mafresh. It has to have a certain size, certain quantity. And over there, we do combine the different bran, the coarse and the fine bran. So apparently it is edible. It's considered to be part of the dough, a part of the bread, and it makes up the minimum size to be mechayiv one for challah. And here we're saying l'gabei Shabbos that it's not combined together. We do not combine it together to make up the shear of a groigres, because we say over here that it's not edible. Amar Abaye shkein ani oichel pitay beisa blusa. That is so by challah because only a poor person will eat bread from dough that's not refined, that's not fine, doesn't come from fine flour. An average person, certainly a wealthy person, but even an average person, he will refine the flour, he'll sift it and refine it, and he won't eat it with the bran, even fine bran. But a very poor person will eat bread, will make the bread from very coarse flour, and he will eat the bran. So therefore, as follows: Legabe the chiyuv of challah, the pasuk says lechem haaretz. It's bread from the haaretz, meaning even from the haaretz, from the lower end of it. It's from any bread from the haaretz, lechem haaretz, and this is considered lechem haaretz. It's considered to be the lechem of the haaretz because the poor person will eat it. There doesn't have to be any chashivas for this bread. And the chiyuv challah doesn't involve a chashva bread, valuable bread that wealthier people eat. It's lechem haaretz. It's even basic bread. So a very poor person will eat the coarse bread made from coarse flour. He will eat the bran. So that's still enough to be considered lechem haaretz. It's lechem that people would eat. Some people would eat it. But legabe Shabbos, we say the minimum shear, it has to have a chashivas. And coarse flour, bread that's made from coarse flour, it's not choshev. So the bran is not mitzvah to the minimum shear of a gegreirus. In order to be chayav for Haitzar for Shabbos, it has to be a minimum shear of something choshev. Now it may be that the very poor person will eat this kind of bread, and will eat bread made from this kind of flour, but it's not choshev, it doesn't have a chashivah, so therefore legabe hichol Shabbos he's potter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer chutz miklipei adoshim. Rabbi Yehuda says that the different shells and peels, etc., are not mitzdarev. However, he says an exception is the klipei adoshim, the shells of the lentils, because they're mispashlas imoyim, which are cooked. They're cooked with the lentils. So those shells which are cooked with the lentils are mitzdarev because they're considered food. They're considered part and parcel of the lentils, and they're considered food. So Zoktamor Adashim in, it's Mash Rabbi Yehuda says only by lentils, but pool and loy. But if it's the shells of beans, we will not be mitzareh. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer chutz miklipe pulin va'adoshin. He says an exception is for both of them, even by beans. Even by beans, we do say that it's considered oichel, the shell of the beans. And in our Mishnah, he says only adoshim, only lentils, not beans. The Gemara says like kasha habecharati. The Brisa that says also beans is talking about charati, fresh ones. When it's fresh, he will cook the lentils with the shells and also the beans. So therefore also the shells of beans are mistar. How about tiki? In our Mishnah, we're talking about when it's not so fresh. So therefore lentils, the shell, cook them with the shells, but not beans. So tiki, my time beloy. Practically more why old ones not? Why will we say by the old ones he doesn't cook? What's the difference? They turn dark, and when they're not fresh, they turn dark. When he cooks them, they look black, and they look like there's flies into the pot. So people won't cook them with the shells by the beans because it looks like there are flies over there, and it's mias. So he won't cook it. If it's charati, he will. It doesn't darken, so it doesn't have that appearance, and it's edible. And it's the same as lentils. By lentils, there's no difference. If it's charati or tiki, he will cook them together nevertheless. So therefore, they're mitzvah. So our Mishnah is talking where it says, Yehuda only says lentils and does not say beans. We're talking about in the case where it's a tiki. And we're talking about where they're not so fresh, so he'll only cook the lentils, not the beans. But the Brisa is talking that it's charati, and he will cook both of them together, so he's chayav even on the beans. The shells are mitzdarif. Hadrullah klal gadol, hadrullah klal gadol, hadrullah klal gadol. New Perik, what is the shear of wine? So we said before in the previous Mishnah, in the previous Perik, that the shear for Oichlem is Kegroigers. What is the shear for wine? Hamaitzi yain k'dei mezigas hakais. The share for wine is the amount of wine that would be needed is that you put it in a kais. We'll see in the Gemara which kais we're talking about. You put it in a cup. The amount of undiluted wine that would be in the normal proportions that you would use to have diluted and have the end result of a kais shel bracha. So, in those days the wine was very strong, and they used to dilute it with water. They'd have a certain percentage of wine which was chai, which was undiluted, and they dilute it in a certain ratio, a certain proportion. The amount of wine that is chai that we're talking about, what is the shear of yain chai? It's the amount that would be normally used to put into a cup, which would then be diluted to have the measure of a cup. As we'll see in the Gemara, we mean a kais shel bracha. The Gemara will discuss this in greater detail. Dr. Pnei Yeshua. Over here in this mission, in this parak, we see different shiurim for the different liquids. So as we see, the mission talks about wine, it talks about milk, it talks about honey. It's going to give the different shiurim for the different liquids that we're discussing over here. Each one according to its chashivas and what it's used for, and therefore we say whatever has a minimum amount of chashivas, if a person carries that out, he takes it out on Shabbos, he's chayiv. Now in the previous Mishnah we talked about foods, and in foods we were not mechalik. We did not differentiate between this type of food and that type of food, between bread and fruit, etc. There was no difference in all the foods. It's egregious. And here in this Mishnah, we're talking about liquids. And here we differentiate between the different types of liquids. And some have this shear and some have a different measure. What's the difference between them? Dr. Pnei Yeshua, that legabe food, the shear of egregious is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. There is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai that the minimum size for haitzah by foods is kegreigers. That's not based on a svara. It's based on halach l'Moshe Sinai, so it applies across the board. By liquids, there's no halach l'Moshe Sinai. So over there, it's based on a svara. The Chachamim gave a svara. What is the minimum chashivos for each type of liquid? What is the minimum amount that it's still considered chashiv, and therefore a person should be chayiv. If he carries that out on Shabbos, it's considered that he carried a davar chashiv. So each liquid has a different shiur of what is considered chashiv. So yain is kedei mezigas hakais. As we'll see, the more we'll discuss this in greater detail. Cholav, milk, how much of milk that we talk kedei gemia? The amount that a person would gulp at one time. That's the amount of shear of milk. Dr. Ramban, in this context we're talking about, it's not a relative term. It doesn't mean each person how much he personally would gulp at one time. And it doesn't matter about the size of the person. It's based on the average size of a person and how much he would gulp, take in one gulp at what time. That is the shear of chashivas of milk. Ma'itzu chalav is kedei gemia. Devash is kedei litin ala kosis. What is the shear of honey? The shear of honey is kedei litin ala kosis. As Rashi explains, if there were sores, if the animals had sores, they used to put honey on it to soothe the sores. So the amount of honey that was normally put onto an average sore, the amount of honey that was normally placed on that's the shear of chashivas for honey. Shemen, how much oil is kedei losuch ever cotton? To rub it, anoint it on a small aver. We'll see in the Gemara, what small limb are we talking about? Mayim, how much water is kedei loshuv behemes akilor? In order to mix it with a salve, they used to put a salve and ointment on their eyes or different areas. So how much water was mixed with this ointment? That's the amount of water that has chashivas. V'shar kol hamashkim b'revius, all other liquids, the shears are revius. V'chol hashayfim, all wastewater is b'revius. We'll see in the Gemara what is the use for wastewater and why is it even chayiv and why is it chashiv at all. We'll see in the Gemara what the application is. The shear, however, is a revius. Rav Shimon oimer kulam b'revius. Rav Shimon says no, all of the liquids the shear is a revius. All of these other shiurim that are mentioned that we discuss in the Mishnah, they're only mentioned these shiurim are mentioned for a person who hides it away. he holds, or Shimon holds, that all standard liquids are standard shiurs or revias. If a person, without any kind of machshava prior or action prior to designate it to show its chashivas, the standard shiur would be a revias. We have all these other shiur. What's the point of this? This is that for a person who's machshavit and he stores away even small quantities, there's still, even for the person who's matzniya, there is a minimum shiur. He's only chayv if he has this minimum shiur. So Rav Shimon, as opposed to the way we learned in the previous parak that the Tana held that for the matzniya, the shiur is not for matzniya. Matzniya is whatever he puts away, he gives it chashivas. There is no minimum shiur. Rav Shimon holds no, that even for a matzniya, even for the person who hides it away and stores it away and he's machshvet, even for him there still is a minimum shiur, and this is the minimum shiur even for that person. But if a person who does not give it special chashivas, who does not designate and give it special chashivas, over here the standard shiur is a revius, and less than revius he's palter. So Rav Shimon is chaylik on the Tana from the previous parak. Zok the Gemara Tana, when we say yain is kedei mezigas hakayis, the amount of wine that's used to dilute a cup, Tana kedei mezigas kayis yofa. A kayis yofa, a kais that's beautified. My kais yofa. What is a kais yofa? Kais shel bracha. It's a kais shel bracha. The kais that we bench on. The kais of bracha of benching. And Omar Rav Nachman Omar Rav Bravu kais shel bracha tzarach sheba roiv revias k'dei shims again aviyam al revias. So what the meaning is as follows: the amount of yain chai, which is considered a choshev, that a person should be chayiv if he takes it out, he carries it on Shabbos, is a quarter of a revius, because a kais shel bracha requires a revius. And what they used to do is they took a yain chai, undiluted wine, a quarter of revius, diluted with 3 parts of water, and the end result is a revius. A kais shel bracha needs a minimum shiur of a revius. So the minimum shiur of yain chai, of undiluted wine, is a quarter revius. They diluted 3 parts water to end up. The end result was a kais of a revius. So the amount of yain chai that a person, the minimum shiur to be chai for on Shabbos, is a quarter revius, which is a kedei mezigas hakayis, which is the amount of yain chai that you would place in a kais shel bracha to end up with the shiur of a revius after it's diluted. So the shiur of yain chai is a quarter of a revius.